Victory Academy stood tall and proud on the lush green hill, its grand gates gleaming under the morning sun. It wasn't just a school, it was a symbol of privilege, where the children of the wealthy walked its corridors like royalty. Among them was Adiz, the daughter of the prominent businessman Mr. Obi. She wasn't just rich, she was beautiful, confident, and, to those who dared cross her, cruel. Adiz walked through the school halls like a queen surveying her kingdom, her head held high, her every move commanding attention. Then there was Chaita, a scholarship student with dreams as big as the sky. She didn't have Adiz's expensive clothes or her powerful connections, but what she did have was intelligence, perseverance, and a heart that refused to bow to the scorn of others. She had earned her place at Victory Academy through sheer hard work, but that didn't matter to Adiz and her friends. To them, Chaita was a constant reminder of the gap between wealth and ambition, and Adiz made it her mission to ensure that Chaita never forgot it. One crisp morning, the school cafeteria buzzed with laughter and chatter as students gathered for breakfast. Chaita sat alone at a small corner table, her textbooks spread out before her. The food on her tray had grown cold, she was far too absorbed in her studies to notice. Across the room, Adiz spotted her and nudged her best friend, Ifunanya, with a wicked grin. "Look at her," Adiz said loudly, making no effort to lower her voice. "Always acting like she's better than everyone just because she's smart." Ifunanya giggled, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "Maybe we should just leave her alone today," she muttered. But Adiz was already on the move. She sauntered over to Chaita's table, her friends trailing behind her. With a dramatic sigh, Adiz slid into the seat across from Chaita and picked up one of her books, flipping through it as if it were a magazine. "You're always studying," Adiz said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Do you really think it'll make a difference? No matter how hard you try, you'll always be, what's the word? Oh, yes. Charity." Chaita looked up slowly, her dark eyes meeting Adiz. She didn't say a word, but her calm gaze seemed to unnerve Adiz. It was as though Chaita could see right through her. "I'm talking to you," Adiz snapped, slamming the book shut. "And I heard you," Chaita replied quietly. Her voice was steady, her tone free of malice. "But tell me, Adiz, what do you gain by being cruel?" The cafeteria fell silent. For a moment, Adiz seemed at a loss for words. Then her lips curled into a sneer. "You think you're so wise, don't you? Let me remind you, people like you only survive here because of people like me. My father's money keeps this school running. Without us, you'd still be in the village." Chaita stood, her small frame somehow radiating strength. "Your father's money may pay for my scholarship, but it doesn't define my worth. One day, you'll understand that there's more to life than wealth." Adiz laughed, but the sound was hollow. She tossed the book back onto the table and strutted away, her friends following her like shadows. Chaita sat down, her hands trembling slightly, but she refused to cry. She had heard worse before, and she would hear it again. What mattered was that she stayed true to herself. Later that day, Mr. Obi arrived at the school for a board meeting. He was a tall, dignified man with a commanding presence. As he walked through the garden, he noticed a girl sitting on a bench, completely absorbed in a book. Something about her struck him, a quiet determination that reminded him of his own struggles in his younger days. Curious, he approached her. "Good afternoon," he said, his deep voice breaking the silence. Chaita looked up, startled. "Good afternoon, sir," she replied politely, closing her book. "You're very focused," Mr. Obi observed. "What are you studying?" "It's for my mathematics class," Chaita explained. "I have an exam tomorrow." Mr. Obi smiled. "That's admirable. What's your name?" "Chaita, sir." "Chaita Nwakoi." The name lingered in Mr. Obi's mind long after their conversation ended. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed several times. Each encounter deepened his admiration for her intelligence, humility, and strength of character. Chaita had a way of speaking that was both thoughtful and sincere, and it wasn't long before Mr. Obi found himself looking forward to their conversations. Adiz, however, remained oblivious. She continued her reign of terror over Chaita, her insults growing sharper with each passing day. She had no idea that her father's heart was slowly being won over by the very girl she despised. Then came the day that changed everything. At the breakfast table, Mr. Obi cleared his throat and announced, "I have some news. I'm getting married." Adiz froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Married? To who?" Mr. Obi smiled. "Her name is Cheta." The words hit Adiz like a thunderclap. She stared at her father, then at the girl standing quietly beside him. It was her, Cheta, the scholarship student she had spent years tormenting. Adiz's mind raced, her emotions a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and humiliation. How could this happen? How could her father, her powerful, successful father, choose Cheta? As Cheta took her place at the table, Adiz felt the ground shift beneath her feet. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. And for the first time, she realized that the tables had turned. For the first time in her life, Adiz felt powerless. Cheta, the girl she had once looked down on, was now part of her family, a stepmother, no less. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. She sat stiffly at the dining table, her eyes darting between her father and Cheta. How had her life spiraled so far out of her control? Cheta, on the other hand, carried herself with her usual quiet grace. Though she was nervous about this new role, she didn't let it show. She had always been resilient, and this time was no different. She knew the challenges ahead, especially with Adiz, but she was determined to handle them with kindness. The atmosphere in the Obi household changed almost immediately after the marriage. Adiz, who was used to being the center of attention, found herself pushed to the edges. Cheta wasn't trying to take her place, but her mere presence seemed to eclipse Adiz's influence. Mr. Obi, who had always indulged his daughter, now spent more time with his new wife. It was a stark contrast to the carefree life Adiz had enjoyed, and she wasn't about to take it lying down. Adiz began to wage a silent war against Cheta. She ignored her in public, refused to acknowledge her as part of the family, and made snide comments whenever they were alone. One evening, as Cheta prepared dinner, Adiz walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, her arms folded. "You must be feeling very proud of yourself," Adiz said coldly. "Marrying into money. I suppose that was your plan all along." Cheta turned to her, her expression calm. "I didn't plan this, Adiz. Your father and I care for each other. That's all." Adiz scoffed. "Care? Don't make me laugh. You're nothing but a gold digger." Cheta's hands stilled, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to her work, her silence infuriating Adiz even more. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Adiz continued. "Just because you read a few books and got a scholarship." "No, Adiz," Cheta said softly. "I don't think I'm better than you. But I wish you'd stop seeing me as your enemy." Adiz stared at her, speechless. Cheta's words didn't feel like a challenge, they felt genuine, and that was what made them so unsettling. Without another word, Adiz stormed out of the kitchen, her chest tight with frustration. In the days that followed, Adiz tried harder to disrupt Cheta's life. She refused to eat the meals Cheta prepared, made a mess of her room, and even complained to her father about Cheta's lack of respect. But Mr. Obi wasn't swayed. If anything, he grew more frustrated with Adiz's behavior. "One day, you'll realize how lucky you are to have someone like Cheta in your life," he told her one evening. "But until then, I hope you learn to grow up." The words stung, but Adiz refused to let them show. Instead, she channeled her anger into more drastic measures. She began spreading rumors about Cheta at school, telling anyone who would listen that her stepmother had schemed her way into the Obi family. It didn't take long for the whispers to reach Cheta, but as always, she kept her composure. "I won't let her win," Cheta told herself. "If I lose my temper, I'll prove her right." One afternoon, as the school day ended, Cheta waited by the gate to pick Adiz up. She had promised Mr. Obi that she would make an effort to connect with his daughter, even if Adiz refused to do the same. But as the students poured out of the building, Adiz was nowhere to be seen. Cheta's heart sank. Where could she be? After nearly an hour of searching, Cheta found Adiz sitting under a tree behind the school, her face buried in her hands. For a moment, Cheta hesitated. This was a side of Adiz she had never seen before, vulnerable, almost childlike. "Adiz," she said gently. "What's wrong?" Adiz looked up, her eyes red with unshed tears. "Why do you care?" she snapped. "You're just here to replace my mother." Cheta knelt beside her, her voice calm. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I know how much you loved your mother. I would never try to take her place." Adiz didn't respond. For the first time, her usual confidence seemed to falter. Cheta stayed with her, silently offering comfort. Though Adiz didn't say it, she felt a small flicker of gratitude. But she wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. As the days turned into weeks, Cheta's patience began to wear down Adiz's walls. Cheta didn't push or force her way into Adiz's life, she simply remained consistent. When Adiz had a bad day, Cheta was there with a kind word. When Adiz ignored her, Cheta didn't take it personally. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in Adiz's armor. But the turning point came during a family dinner. Mr. Obi, sensing the tension between his wife and daughter, decided to address it head-on. "I know this has been a difficult adjustment for both of you," he said. "But we're a family now. We need to support each other." Adiz said nothing, her eyes fixed on her plate. But as Mr. Obi continued, she found herself glancing at Cheta. For the first time, she saw not a rival, but a person, someone who had endured far more than she had ever imagined. That night, as Adiz lay in bed, she replayed the events of the past few weeks in her mind. She thought about the way she had treated Cheta, the things she had said and done. And for the first time, she felt a pang of guilt. Change wouldn't come overnight, but it had begun. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the Obi household, but the air inside remained tense. Adiz had been unusually quiet since the dinner where her father had urged them to come together as a family. She hadn't thrown any tantrums, nor had she said anything spiteful to Cheta. But she hadn't apologized, either. Cheta, as always, approached the situation with patience. She continued her daily routine, preparing meals, tidying up, and helping Mr. Obi with his work. Adiz observed her from a distance, her thoughts in turmoil. How could someone she had treated so cruelly remain so kind? The guilt that had taken root in her heart was growing, and she didn't know how to face it. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. One afternoon, Adiz and her friends decided to go shopping in the busy streets of the city. Cheta offered to drive them, much to Adiz's annoyance. But her friends were thrilled. They had heard whispers about Cheta's elegance and wanted to see for themselves. As they strolled through the market, Adiz wandered off, irritated by the attention her friends were giving Cheta. She walked into a small, crowded alley, her mind clouded with resentment. But as she turned a corner, she felt a hand grab her bag. "Hey!" she shouted, but it was too late. A street thief had snatched her bag and disappeared into the crowd. Panic surged through her as she realized her phone, wallet, and everything else she had with her were gone. By the time Cheta and the others noticed her absence and found her, Adiz was trembling. "Someone stole my bag," she said, her voice shaking. Cheta didn't hesitate. She immediately approached a nearby vendor, who pointed them in the direction the thief had run. Ignoring the protests of Adiz's friends, Cheta took off after the thief, her sandals slapping against the pavement. Adiz and her friends followed hesitantly, their fear outweighing their curiosity. After what felt like an eternity, Cheta caught up to the thief in a narrow alley. She didn't confront him with anger or accusations. Instead, she said calmly, "I don't want any trouble. Just give me the bag, and I won't report you." The thief hesitated, perhaps surprised by her composure. After a tense moment, he handed over the bag and disappeared into the shadows. Cheta returned to Adiz, who stood frozen in disbelief. "Here," Cheta said, handing her the bag. "Are you okay?" Adiz nodded, unable to meet Cheta's eyes. She had expected a lecture, a snide comment about how her carelessness had caused the whole ordeal. Instead, she was met with nothing but concern. The car ride home was silent. Adiz sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her mind racing. She replayed the events of the day, from Cheta's swift action to her calm response in the face of danger. For the first time, Adiz felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before: respect. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Adiz stood up abruptly. Her father and Cheta looked at her in surprise. "I have something to say," she began, her voice unsteady. I've been unfair, she admitted, her eyes fixed on the table. To you, Cheta. From the moment you came into our lives, I've treated you horribly. I thought you were trying to take something from me, but I see now that I was wrong. You've only ever been kind, even when I didn't deserve it. I'm sorry. Cheta's eyes softened. Thank you, Adiz. That means a lot to me. Mr. Obi beamed with pride. This is the family I've always wanted, he said, raising his glass. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Adiz made a conscious effort to repair her relationship with Cheta. She started helping with household chores, joining Cheta on errands, and even asking her for advice on schoolwork. The hostility that had once filled their home was replaced with laughter and warmth. One day, as they sat together in the living room, Adiz asked, "How do you do it, Cheta? Stay so calm, even when people treat you badly?" Cheta smiled. "I learned a long time ago that anger only makes things worse. If you want to change someone's heart, you have to lead with kindness." Adiz nodded, her respect for Cheta growing with every word. For the first time, she saw her not as an enemy, but as a role model. Years later, as Adiz looked back on those days, she realized how much Cheta had changed her life. The lessons she had learned from her stepmother shaped her into a better person, one who valued character over wealth, kindness over pride. The story of Adiz and Cheta became one of redemption and forgiveness, proving that even the most broken relationships could be mended with love and understanding.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories.